going to call to order the Armed Services Committee, Subcommittee on Tactical Air and Land Forces. I want to thank our witnesses today for coming in to testify on the Army's modernization strategy for fiscal year 2024. The Army's been particularly harmed by the President's budget request for fiscal year 2024, and force structure and force modernization have served as the bill payer for the President's domestic priorities. With essentially a flat budget from last year, inflation will provide a 5% reduction in real procurement for the Army. For example, fiscal year 2024 budget request for brigade equipping has been particularly limited for Army, including a 60% reduction in Abrams tanks and a 50% reduction in Stryker and Paladin howitzers. While I look forward to discussions with our witnesses today, I'm convinced that Congress will need to step in and once again reverse this dangerous trajectory offered by the administration. I'm also concerned about the lack of Indo-PACOM prioritization by the budget request. RAND recently completed a report that indicated large-scale maneuver forces may be relevant for the Middle East, Eastern Europe, and Korean Peninsula, but are difficult to envision for a China-specific contingency. RAND was particularly concerned and critical of reductions in logistics connectors, ISR capabilities, and communications networks. RAND further questioned Army's long-range precision fires and Army's ability to use this capability effectively in theater. I share many of these concerns with the Department's ability to respond to Chinese provocation and the Army's ability to adequately support the Joint Force, and I look forward to shaping an Army that is relevant to the Indo-PACOM area. As we work to enhance the Army's lethality and relevance to contend with the challenges we face today, every dollar must go further and deliver superior value. This requires evaluating programs for technology maturation and feasibility. Another Army modernization priority has been an Integrated Visual Augmentation System, or IVAS. Previous iterations of IVAS have left the majority of soldiers reporting at least one symptom of physical impairment, to include disorientation, dizziness, eye strain, heads and motion sickness, nausea, neck strain, and tunnel vision. We have already spent $1.5 billion on this program, and in April of 2022, the DoD Inspector General completed an audit citing concerns that this program could result in wasting up to $21.9 billion in taxpayers' funds to field a system that soldiers may not want to use, or if it's used as intended, could cause problems. I'm particularly concerned about a product that would cost over $60,000 per soldier, and think that the IVAS system needs to be carefully scrutinized to ensure that soldier lethality is enhanced and that Army's limited budget is maximized. I also want to discuss Army's arbitrary climate strategy and the almost $200 million proposed in the budget request for tactical vehicles. When Army decided to publish their climate strategy that would require fully electric tactical vehicles by 2050, I was particularly troubled. I support investments that provide a reasonable return on taxpayers' investments in innovations that increase soldier lethality. Unfortunately, the budget request appears to be yet another presidentially driven investment strategy that may ultimately reduce soldier lethality and degrade our national security in the near term. But all is not bad. For example, I'm supportive of the administration's budget request for conventional munitions. It is a bold request to address the particularly decrepit state of munitions industrial base and meet the long-term munitions objectives for our partners and allies. Still, we must continue to ask the hard questions. For example, the weapons accounts have been historically rife with boom-bust spending sprees to address critical munition shortfalls. My fear is that a 500% increase in 155mm howitzer rounds may not be sustainable, and that a longer-term plan to restore production may be a better strategy. Additionally, Ukraine has also taught us that the time frame for conflict has been particularly undervalued. Rosy projections of reduced conflict timelines that limit critical munitions requirements were particularly misguided. The total Army munitions requirement needs to be significantly overhauled to ensure the Army is able to respond tonight to worldwide military provocation. There is much to discuss in this hearing, and I look forward to the testimony of our witnesses. I now yield to my friend, the ranking member from New Jersey, Mr. Norcross.
Thank you, Chairman. Appreciate it, and certainly to our witnesses for being here today. The subcommittee, we're meeting today with the Army Research, Development, and Acquisition Programs, certainly one of the more important hearings that we have. And we just came from vote, so it's not reflective of our colleagues not being here. They will be here shortly. Anyway, this year is critically important given the challenges that we are reading in the newspaper every day and certainly experience. The leadership of our international support for Ukraine against the Russian invasion just highlights so many of the issues we'll be addressing. So this afternoon we have two big objectives. First, we understand how the Army's budget request for fiscal 24 will satisfy their equipment modernization requirement for today and obviously into the future. Second, we want to ensure Congress and the American people have a clear picture of the Army's success over the last year in managing the organization, production, transportation, and delivery of billions of dollars worth of material and support for Ukraine. The Army investment and the management of weapon systems, equipment, munitions, industrial base risks must now find a way to satisfy the urgency of today's challenges and prepare for the futures. We'll get into the issue of how that determination is made because we as a country are not running short. We as a world are running short trying to do Ukraine. We're not going to give away things that we potentially need, and that's a balance that we have been talking about since the very beginning. Managing the munitions industrial base, it was over 4 years ago that this subcommittee noted with the concern of the unacceptable risk, capability and capacity and safety of the nation's organic ammunition industrial base. We first pressed the Army to develop, deliver an industrial base master plan to ensure identification of its highest priority. So then, working closely with the Army in each of the last 3 years, we found additional resources to accelerate the modernization of the facilities and certainly improve safety. One of the first things that happened were some of the explosions from years ago where people were seriously injured and in some cases killed. We all got a wake-up call on that and started that, which I believe was incredibly important. And thanks to the Army's willingness with this subcommittee today, we're better prepared to deal with the industrial-based challenges and for the support of Ukraine. Today's goal is to better understand how Congress can continue to help achieve the modernization objectives and at the same time provide support for Ukrainian requirements. We must help manage risk at acceptable levels between investment priorities, current and future capabilities, and the industrial base. Certainly when we look at the 155s and the investment that is already made, because so much of the equipment that we are talking about in this area is not sitting on the shelf at the Home Depot. This has to be ordered, specialized, and made. So starting 4 years ago, and certainly what has happened over the last year has made an incredibly bad situation much worse and headed in the right direction. But we certainly are looking forward to the testimony. And Chairman, I yield back.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Norcross. We'll now go to our witnesses. We'll begin with General Rainey, then to Mr. Bush, and then to Lieutenant General Peterson.
Chairman Whitman, Ranking Member Norcross.
General Rainey, if you could pull the microphone to you, that'll be great.
Chairman Whitman, Ranking Member Norcross, distinguished members of the subcommittee, good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to testify about how the Army's FY 2024 budget request supports the Army's comprehensive approach to modernization as we deliver Army 2030 and design Army 2040. Army Futures Command is accountable for transforming the Army to ensure war-winning future readiness, and modernization is an essential part of that. I'm honored to be here with my teammates, the Honorable Mr. Doug Bush and Lieutenant General Eric Peterson. I believe that Army modernization is on track. I believe there are 4 key reasons for that. The first is very strong teamwork. AFC works in close partnership with ASALT. Mr. Bush and I have a very positive and professional working relationship, and that extends across our organizations. We work together from idea to putting new equipment and weapons into soldiers' hands. Our teamwork also includes integrating efforts across the whole Army, TRADOC, FORSCOM, Army Material Command, and the Army Service Component Commanders out in our critical theaters. Because we don't fight as an Army, but as part of the Joint Force, we also integrate closely with our sister services. The second factor is consistency. For the last 5 years, the Army has remained committed to the same 6 modernization priorities, and these 6 priorities complement and support Secretary Warmo's 6 operational imperatives for Army 2030. Third is organization. 5 years ago, to pursue the 6 priorities, the Army created 8 cross-functional teams, one of the unquestioned success stories of AFC so far. The Army's capitalizing on the success of our CFTs by adding a new one, a CFT for contested logistics, to get after one of the biggest warfighting challenges we face. And fourth is our commitment to continuous learning. Project Convergence is not a one-time event. It's the Army's campaign of persistent experimentation. Project Convergence includes linked learning events throughout the year that inform each other. For example, Balakatan, an annual bilateral exercise, is underway now in the Philippines. And the experimental demonstration gateway event, known as EDGE, is scheduled to take place next month at Yuma Proving Ground. All of these things work together to deliver the speed, range, and convergence our Army needs as part of the Joint Force to ensure overmatch against our adversaries. Material modernization is absolutely an essential part of transforming our Army to ensure war-winning future readiness. Transformation turns material modernization into true warfighting capability and lethality. It makes sure that we are the dominant land force in the world now, in 2030, in 2040, and at every point in between. Transformation means thinking in terms of formations, not just platforms. It means modernizing our equipment along with all the other elements of DOTMLPF doctrine, organizations, training, leader development, and facility. And transformation means thinking further out in the future to 2040 and beyond. Defining the future operating environment, developing future concepts, and experimenting aggressively. We need to approach 2040 with a sense of urgency now over the next 18 to 24 months. Transforming the Army to ensure war-winning future readiness and doing that persistently and urgently is the best guarantee that our successful material modernization efforts will produce lethal formations that will deter our enemies and, if required, dominate the land domain in conflict. Thank you for your support to the soldiers and civilians of our organizations and the Army. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, General Rainey. We'll now go to the Honorable Doug Bush.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Whitman, Ranking Member Norcross, distinguished members of the Armed Services Subcommittee on Tactical Air and Land Forces, good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation to appear before you to discuss the Army Modernization Program and resources requested in the President's budget for fiscal year 2024. I'm pleased to be joined today by my teammates, General James Rainey from Army Futures Command and Lieutenant General Eric Peterson, Army Deputy Chief of Staff, G8. We appreciate you making our joint written statement part of the record for today's hearing. With your support, the Army's fiscal year 2024 budget request gives us the opportunity to maintain critical momentum across the board. The Army's budget request puts us on a sustainable path to equip today's soldiers with modern equipment while we invest in the technologies and systems necessary to build the Army of 2030. It represents our sustained commitment to our key modernization portfolios, long-range precision fires, next-generation combat vehicles, future vertical lift, the network, air and missile defense, and soldier lethality. It also continues modernization and procurement of our enduring platforms and equipment that will remain in the force for years to come. However, no budget can be built without balancing risks, and this one is no different. I do believe that this budget reflects a thoughtful and balanced approach between developing future capabilities and modernizing our enduring systems. But at the end of the day, members of Congress will decide if we struck the appropriate balance, and I welcome that dialogue. Before turning to General Peterson, I would like to emphasize a few key points that I believe are of interest to this committee. First, I can say with confidence that this year's budget request fully recognizes the Army's role in the Pacific. It supports requirements in the Indo-Pacific theater by prioritizing investments in long-range precision fires, air and missile defense, and sensing capabilities. And if you look at the future years defense program that accompanied the 24 request, you will see important procurement investment dollars in the network, long-range fires, air and missile defense, and deep sensing. And that transition to procurement out of R&D is particularly significant because without procurement, we don't actually end up with anything soldiers can actually go to war with. So that transition is a big deal for the Army, and I believe we're on the front edge of that, and it's highly relevant to the Pacific. Second, I'd like to provide an update on the Army's efforts to expand critical munitions production, including opportunities to further expand capacity and reduce production timelines. As part of the Army's role in the overall government response to Ukraine, we are using the generous funding provided by Congress and every authority at our disposal, including those provided in the FY23 NDAA, while working closely with our industry partners to dramatically increase production rates across the board. We have a generational opportunity, in my view, working with Congress to improve the quality and modernization of our organic industrial base. Through your support, production rates in key areas such as munitions replenishment are on the rise, and we are also able to address critical obsolescence issues with regard to our machinery and weaknesses in the precision munitions industrial base for downstream. Third, I'd like to quickly highlight something I believe the Army is doing right, especially our efforts to adapt experimentation and testing to support concept development and accelerate our modernization efforts. As we address in our written statement, the Army is modernizing our business practices by embracing industry best practices such as soldier-centered design and rigorous experimentation. General Rainey elaborated in his statement on the great work AFC is doing in this regard. Fourth, I'd like to address concerns I've heard from some members about how the Army is managing risk and modernizing enduring capabilities while prioritizing future programs. As members are aware, in order to protect the Army's highest priority programs, the Army has adjusted funding in some areas, specifically the pace of our modernization of our armored brigade combat teams. However, in doing so, the Army sought to ensure we didn't go so low on any system that we put the industrial base at risk to a degree that forecloses the ability of the Army to ramp back up if the Army's needs change. In short, we sought to ensure we did not close off options for Army leaders or Congress to address our plans in the future if that is what they judge is the right thing to do. That's a careful balance to strike. I acknowledge we don't always get it exactly right. I look forward to working with all members on their views of where the Army landed on this issue. A final issue I would briefly mention is the Army is fully utilizing the new acquisition authorities provided by Congress in recent years to make the Army's acquisition system move much more quickly than in the past. This has resulted in truly pushing the envelope on some programs due to the urgency of the need. That means pushing the envelope on technology as we do so. Shifting to an acquisition culture that accepts more risk will lead to situations where programs encounter delays and challenges as we try to develop new complicated technologies and bring them to the Army. However, I think that risk is most of the time worthwhile, and shifting this culture from one of caution to one of urgency and adaptability and speed is an absolutely essential shift, in my view, to ensuring the acquisition system can do its part of modernizing the Army. And I look forward to discussing where we've had challenges, but also a lot of successes, and I look forward to your support. Thank you for the time today.
Thank you so much. We'll now go to Lieutenant General Peterson.
Good afternoon, Chairman Whitman, Ranking Member Norcross, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear and testify regarding the Army's fiscal year 24 modernization efforts. And thanks as well to all of the committee members for your enduring support of our soldiers, their families, and our civilians as they play a vital role in our nation's defense, a role that they have played faithfully for 248 years nearly. Our modernization investment request for fiscal year 24 reflects our multi-year effort to accelerate and focus modernization and place relevant transformational capabilities in the hands of our soldiers. Our Army is progressing through the most significant transformation in almost half a century, bringing to bear new capabilities that support the 2022 National Defense Strategy of integrated deterrence and campaigning to gain military advantage. Our investments provide tangible advantage over nations' near-peer adversaries. They contribute directly to the joint forces' ability to deter aggression and our ability, when called upon, to fight and win decisively. As we modernize, we are setting the Army on a sustainable strategic path that balances and prioritizes the generational investments that we are making. To that end, we remain committed to our modernization priorities, and that commitment, combined with several years of ruthless prioritization, continuous reassessment, and your sustained support promises to place these vital capabilities in the hands of our soldiers with unprecedented speed. We continue to accelerate our modernization efforts through teamwork, engaged senior leadership, process refinement, and the authorities and resources you provide our Army. Our progress thus far is not without risk. We must modernize responsibly, maintaining readiness now while transforming at a pace informed by available resources. Several years of ruthless prioritization, eliminating, reducing, and deferring lower priority and less necessary modernization efforts, as well as divesting of legacy capability, affords virtually no further flexibility in our fiscal top line. We've made the easy choices, the difficult choices, and the hard choices over the past several years. We're now down to the excruciating choices. As such, we ask for your continued support and, as always, for timely resourcing to maintain momentum in the face of ever-growing threats. In closing, I'd like to offer one very brief additional thanks, and that's to your staff, professional and personal, who facilitate the engagement necessary to advance our shared commitment to the defense of our nation. And again, thank you for the opportunity to appear, and I look forward to your questions.
Lieutenant General Peterson, thank you so much. Thanks for your observations and your comments. They are very important and very thoughtful, and we will absolutely make sure that they are addressed in the things that we go over in today's committee hearing. Secretary Bush, let me begin with you. The Army's proposed what is essentially a flat budget request for FY23. If you factor in where we are with inflation, actually the budget request would overall shrink the Army, and the Army's modernization effort has clearly been reduced because of that. And I would argue readiness is being impacted. As we look at efforts that affect Abrams, Bradley fighting vehicles, Paladins, those things are particularly acute, especially as we look at demands that come to us from efforts in efforts in Ukraine. The biggest challenge that I think the Army faces is in the face of modernization, how do you make sure you're also in the realm of being able to carry on regular operations that maintain readiness, at the same time looking at existing platforms that you either have to replace or that you have to put through service life extensions or depot maintenance, whatever the case may be, and then replace them at the same time, looking at where the Army needs to be. What do you think is the long-term impact of the current state of the budget as it is before Congress, the impact on combatant commanders, the impact on the demand signal that comes to the Army, especially as it's challenged in areas that aren't your conventional combined arms efforts like you'd see in Europe? I mean, what you see in China is, in the Indo-PACOM, and what you would see in relation to China is very, very different. So give me your perspective on how this budget affects that.
Yes, sir. So I could offer a few thoughts and context, and I believe General Rainey could actually offer some really insightful views on how the Army balances this. So the first thing I'd offer as a point of context is the Army's overall budget is $185 billion. That's our request. Of that, what we're talking about today, procurement and R&D, is only 21%. So a tool every Army Secretary-in-Chief has is balancing those needs against the other needs of the Army. What we sought in FY24 was to present a budget that retained future decision space. So we were able to maintain all of our acquisition priority modernization programs on track with regard to, and in some cases did make adjustments because the programs are at different places, while also maintaining, as I said, healthy enough production lines to ensure we haven't closed off options for you or them. But that's always a difficult balance, sir. So I think FY24 is very solid. Over time, as I mentioned, the Army has to shift to procurement of these new systems. That will be a challenge potentially in the out years. It's one we wrestle with every year. That is a long-standing challenge. However, I think the best thing we're doing now is setting the stage for success. So if I can compete for more resources in the Army's budget, for example, we have set the stage for having programs that are ready to go and success stories and investable by senior Army leaders, and that's my main job, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Bush. Thank you, Chairman. And as you know, people, readiness, and modernization are the three major efforts that the Army leadership, the Secretary in Chief, are challenged with every time we build a budget. And they're all hopelessly interrelated and interdependent. I personally like to think about modernization more accurately as future readiness. I mean, it's current readiness versus future readiness, today versus tomorrow. But I'd like to talk about people, that the single biggest asymmetric advantage the United States Army has, and I would offer the Joint Force, is the quality of people we have. So sustaining the all-volunteer force, making sure we have the world-class NCO Corps that we have in the Army that nobody can buy in the world and everybody wants, developing the young men and women that command our formations to be the leaders that are capable of doing the things they can do. And that takes training. It takes education. It takes aggressive training at the National Training Center, Joint Readiness Training Center, and throughout the world. But when we do it right, we're building leaders during training, and we're modernizing the Army to be the best Army in the world at any point along that continuum.
Thanks. That's, I think a very important part of the Army force structure is the men and women that serve. I think you're spot on with that. One of the things, though, I think, aside from that value, that asset that the Army has, is some challenges that I think are pretty significant, and that is, the Army having a significant role in the pivot to the Indo-PACOM. We know the Army has struggled with that. I know in talking to General Flynn, trying to create the opportunity for the Army to have that impact in the Indo-PACOM. I think we need the Army there. I think where the Army is today is not where it needs to be. I was really astounded several years ago. The Army was going down the path of divesting in watercraft. We all know the Indo-PACOM is about logistics. We all know, too, the Army struggling with lines of communication, communication efforts itself, logistics in the Indo-PACOM. We sure know that TRANSCOM is going to be really challenged when it comes to sea lift in that area. I think being able to do those, to be able to be effective there, you're going to have those connectors. That's going to be, I think, a big challenge. We know that large-scale maneuver forces are applicable in Europe. They're not going to be applicable in the Indo-PACOM. The question is how can you be light, fast, and maneuverable? I know General Flynn is struggling to try to figure out how do you do that. It becomes more difficult if you don't have connectors, intra-theater connectors to be able to do that. I know that Secretary Bush has been working on long-range precision fires, trying to take existing systems and modernize those, make sure the Army can be forward in the second island chain. All those things I think are good. The question, though, General Rainey, is how do we do that at the speed of relevance? As the Army's modernizing, the scenario in the European theater, or for that matter in CENTCOM and EUCOM, is very different than the Indo-PACOM. Give me your sense about how do we get the Army where it needs to be at the speed of relevance? We can talk about all those things that happen outside the fit-up. Listen, all of our dreams come true outside the fit-up. The question is what do we do in months, not in years, because Xi Jinping has been pretty specific about what they intend to do in that theater. So give me your perspective on that.
Thank you, Chairman. So working left to right immediately, the efforts that General Flynn is doing pre-conflict, where aggressive exercising, working with partners to establish forward presence, you got to fight to get into position, to deter. And if deterrence doesn't work, you got to be in position so that you don't have to start from San Diego, start from the West Coast, right? So I think General Flynn's doing a phenomenal job of pursuing that, and again, not a modernization thing, but in the training and readiness portfolio, I know the Chief and Secretary are looking to fully support him and could follow up with that, or myself or the G3. So one, win the pre-conflict conflict by aggressively building the partnerships and relationships that we need to get into position to deter. Anything we put into theater, the LIMFAC is we have to be able to protect that, sir. So, that's a challenge with China anything we put forward, it has to be survivable. So the efforts we're pursuing on aggressively pursuing air and missile defense capabilities, working with the joint force and partners to make sure that we can all talk. Project convergence and a really aggressive experimentation that's really getting after how do we link offensive and defensive fires, because the way we pursued those as two separate things is not going to work against the Chinese, and those are things we're going after aggressively. If I may, the Indo-PACOM is our priority in the Army. Our Secretary has made that clear in enabling the joint force to fight. I do not believe personally that there's such a thing as an air and maritime theater. There are only joint theaters. We fight as a joint force, and some have domains matter more at different points in time. So we take very seriously enabling the joint force. We have robust C2 command and control capabilities, both with General Flynn as the CFLIC, and then all of our JTF, all of our core commanders are working towards being capable of JTF command of joint forces. The entire sustainment enterprise is a Title X Army responsibility. We have to protect ourselves. But one thing I think sometimes is not as well understood, not by you obviously, but by some folks, is that we're going to have to control land, right? Not as the main effort, not a big giant multi-core land war maybe, but we absolutely are going to have to take land and control it, whether it's to help the Navy do what they need to do when they come to the shore, to position the Air Force, to guard and secure the command and ammo storage. So we're going to have to be able to control land and protect it. And if the enemy wants to defend that land, then the ability to take that from them is something the Army absolutely has to be able to do. And to your question on long-range fires, I'm sorry for the length, but
okay.
I'm a little passionate about this.
Yes.
The long-range precision fires from the land as another tool for Admiral Aquilino and the commander, not in place of or competing with others, but that presents the Chinese with a real problem. Right? Land forces are more agile, they can move faster, they're harder to find, they're more redundant, and presenting the Chinese with multiple dilemmas in long-range fires, I think is absolutely essential, and I think it's one of the things the Army's really making progress on, so thank you.
Well, listen, thank you. I think your efforts, too, on multi-domain task forces and to make sure that they have full range of operational capability, structure, and then making sure that we exercise them so that we are ready at a moment's notice. The concepts are great. The key is how do we make sure they're properly resourced and exercised so that they are operationally proficient. So, again, thank you. We're going to go now to Mr. Norcross.
Thank you, Chairman. I know we have a scheduling issue, so I want to defer to Ms. Sherrill for her comments.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon. Thank you all for being here today. I want to thank you for your service to and commitment to keeping our nation and our troops safe. And as the Army continues on its modernization path, your work to create a more lethal and survivable force. The U.S. Energetics Enterprise provides the Army and the Joint Force with critical explosive propellant and pyrotechnic materials for a wide range of military systems. Energetic materials remain the most important element in the lethality of military weapon systems. Since the 1920s, Picatinny Arsenal has been at the forefront of explosive formulations and energetic materials development. Mr. Bush and General Rainey, as the Army seeks to modernize its weapon systems and increase lethality, what specifically is the Army doing to prioritize energetic material procurement?
So, ma'am, on the procurement side, I can tell you that right now we are learning as part of our munitions industrial ramp-up, where the gaps are and where the single points of failure are in our current domestic energetics industry, and there are many. So what we are doing is trying to build more, both domestically as part of our efforts to ensure we don't have one place in the country where one building is a problem and then we're out of luck. But also looking at allies. So it is, I think, a picture where we need help in both. We have to absolutely have more capability here, and we're committed to doing that, and then sustaining it for the future, but also working with allies who have much to contribute there. Even if we're leading, they can help, in some cases, Canada in particular.
And as a service, what expertise does the Army specifically bring to efforts to develop more lethal and longer-range energetics?
So, ma'am, as you mentioned, the expertise in the Army really resides at the workforce at Picatinny. That is our people with decades of experience doing this, and not just knowing the science, but knowing how to adapt the science to military use in the Army, which is not always the same thing. So I think there's the academic world, and then there's the applied science world that Picatinny is excellent at. I did look at the budget numbers coming over. I think in the 6.2 and 6.3 lines for long-range precision fires, I believe we do have a good increase this year over last year. That's because of how important that is. I expect that to continue as that remains our #1 modernization priority, ma'am.
And so what opportunities in that field does the Army see to leap ahead in the energetics field, and what support can Congress provide to achieve those goals beyond what you were just talking about with increases?
Yes, ma'am. I'd offer two things to consider. One is kind of foundational R&D to get new formulations. So we took a brief earlier this year, and I consulted with some folks from Picatinny about one particular explosive mixture, or it's an energetic mixture for rocket motors, for example, where they're doing some work to find a way to adapt it and make it safe to use. That kind of research is the 6.1, 6.2 type research to just get to new formulations that are safer, better, easier to produce, even more environmentally friendly to make. The second thing, ma'am, is manufacturing technology. So I think what our industrial buildup has revealed is that we are very good at doing it kind of the traditional way. We need better manufacturing technology to make munitions, but also the components of munitions like energetics. We need machinery that's more flexible, we need machinery that's safer, and we need to harness American ingenuity to find better ways to do this. So when another conflict comes, we can ramp up faster than this time.
And is that manufacturing know-how that is on the civilian side and you just need to purchase it for our military, or is this something that you think needs to be invented to do what you need to do?
So, ma'am, I think it's both. So I think there's, for example, on advanced, automated manufacturing, there's a lot of amazing work going on there in the private sector. When you go to modern manufacturing facilities, you see it. You can see the difference. However, we do have some very specialized things that only we care about and make. There's even some types of steel, for example, that we're the only user of because most people, when they make steel, don't design it to explode well. We do. So there are some military-specific things that really need to be led by the government while also leveraging private sector, ma'am.
I'm running out of time, but thank you so much, and I yield back.
We will now go to Mr. McCormick. And thank goodness that the chairman is not required to say rotary wing aircraft today. Thank you.
And there's no Marines here today, so I didn't bring my crayons either. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon to all of you today, to our distinguished panel. We really appreciate you being here today. Appreciate you coming to testify on how we can ensure maximum capability of lethality and for our ground pounders and providing them with the resources and systems needed to meet present and future battlefield challenges. Despite my own biases, I'm always impressed with the Army's ability to adapt, improvise, and overcome in the face of emerging threats and the changes in the character of warfare, even if your mission briefs are extensively long for my taste. I've always enjoyed my time cross-training with the Army, and I mean that sincerely. I spent some time with the 10th Mountain and 101st, and actually was just with them in Poland recently also, so that was kind of a treat. Honorable Mr. Bush, I'm intrigued by the coming implementation of the Next Generation Squad Automatic Weapon. I understand it has a 6.8 millimeter round, which I'm a little bit concerned that NATO isn't going to be compatible with that, and I hope we grow that presence in NATO allies and other allies around the world just because it is an effective killing machine, and I think it'll do well. With that said, I was a little surprised that we didn't have similar funding for the M4 carbine mod program for the Army's fiscal year 24 budget request, just knowing that it helps with the grouping and the lethality of that weapon system, which is going to be around for about another 15 years, really, by my estimates anyways. I was just hoping that we could work together to make that happen in the future, and if you see that as a need for the Army.
So, sir, if I could start and defer to General Rainey to talk about just how we envision a mix of weapons. From an acquisition standpoint, yes, the Next Generation Squad weapon It's one of our first efforts, actually, where we went from rapid prototyping to rapid fielding, did it dramatically faster than we've done some past firearms programs. From an acquisition standpoint, it's quite innovative. That being said, your point's well taken, sir. It's not for the entire Army, but it is for a very good reason we are developing it. And if I could turn to General Rainey to talk about our overall plan.
If you wouldn't mind addressing the M4 carbine mod specifically, that'd be great. Thanks.
Thank you, Congressman. Thank you, Mr. Bush. The M4 carbine is also an awesome weapon system that has served us well and is part of our enduring category of equipment going forward. And as you said, will be with us for a long time. So continuing to improve the M4 is something that is in the best interest of everybody and would be one of our objectives. The next-gen squad weapon system, if I could offer at your convenience, Congressman, to come over in a classified, show you the reason that we believe that is a requirement. But we don't take adding a new caliber round lightly, and we've done the wraparound thinking about training and facilities, ranges, training ammo, and do that very deliberately. And I'd like the opportunity to follow up with you if you're interested.
Absolutely. And I hope we'll address the mods on the M4 carbines as well, because I think that's
Yes, sir.
important to have that, once again, dialed in so we can have the best weapon system moving forward for the next decade or so.
Yes, sir, absolutely.
Fantastic. Also, I wanted to address I'm going to call it the 91783 heavy dump truck, which I'll now refer to just as a heavy dump truck because that's a lot of words. One of the workhorses of the Georgia National Guard, I know, and of the Army, but seems to be severely underfunded and undermanned. I mean, we have, I think, by my estimates, 436 heavy dump trucks, which leaves it about 686 short of what we requested, which means we have less than half of what we really want moving forward. Just wondering how we're going to address that need going forward in our budget requests and how we're going to sustain our future fleets.
Thank you for that, Congressman. We do have a modernization pathway for our heavy dump trucks. We are proceeding at a measured pace, procuring 36 in our current budget request with a projection to continue with that pace in 25, where we'll reevaluate our precise direction and our trajectory from that point. We still have a full fleet of M917A1s and A2s. We do know and acknowledge that the fleet age is becoming a point of interest to us, and our current focus is to fill the shortage of 145 dump trucks across all components of our Army, which this current budget request does complete for us. And then we will, in the future President's budget, address sustainable modernization pathway once we've reached our full AAO.
I'll look forward to working with you in that, both in the committee and subcommittee. Thank you. And with that, I yield. I'm over time.
Mr. Norcross.
Thank you. The industrial base is a challenge that is not a surprise to any of us. Article today of the private sector in defense is having an extreme difficult time getting the personnel. So we talk about critical materials from trusted partners. Quite frankly, in addition to machinery, trying to develop a workforce is something that does not happen overnight, and it is in critical decline in terms of those being able to take the job. So I want to back up a little bit, and Mr. Bush talked together how the last few years we looked at an industrial base that, quite frankly, when I started, surprised me. There were a couple of noted accidents that really prompted a number of us, Ms. Hartzler, when she was our ranking member, to take a deeper look. And I think you went on several of those with us. And quite frankly, if you've ever seen the show on Discovery, Mysteries of the Abandoned, you look at our ammo plants, and those are the ones that are abandoned because they used to build these things by hand, row after row. And here we are, half a century later, and we have narrowed down those old facilities into, quite frankly, just a few old facilities that we started. So several years ago, we started talking about the critical materials, where are they coming from, where the trusted partners, and those charts that we can change. One of the major issues is not every material can be stockpiled in the same way for the same length of time. It becomes obviously critical and complicated. But the one thing that we did discuss is China's probably not the best place to be in with, so started to make those changes. So the report came out on what that modernization would look like. We started investing a couple of years ago and plussing up, as you know, Mr. Bush. Here we are going into the third year, and we know how difficult it is. The one thing that I want to stress is where we started. We need to get the munitions. We cannot sacrifice the safety of employees. That is one of our highest priorities. But one thing we can do is where employees are having hands-on in these very dangerous departments is have machines built. They don't make them overnight, and they're not sitting out there. So, Mr. Bush, when you look at what we've done, what is planned to be done, where is the most critical area that you see, given not only when the plan was made, but now with the added layer of Ukraine and what they're demanding?
Sir, so first of all, thank you for this committee's work on that issue. We had a plan to modernize, and then we were positioned for additional help, and then certainly it much better positioned us for the production ramp-up we're undergoing right now, because we had that plan ready to go, and members were able to, through supplementals, provide significant additional funds to go much faster than we originally hoped to. I divide the projects into two things, sir. One are the true modernization efforts, where we are trying to take that old machinery and use modern practices. I think Radford has probably one of the best examples, where you see the 1940s buildings doing nitrocellulose work, and we have the brand new facility funded to fundamentally change how we do that to just a modern chemical manufacturing activity. We have projects like that across the board, where we are making a kind of a dramatic change in how we do things. I think what we're finding, though, is just as important is what I would call kind of the infrastructure of these places. So the less glamorous projects, if you want to call them that, but things like the electricity systems, the roads, the civilian support structures, so workers have, for example, better facilities while they're at work. All of that is necessary, and I shouldn't leave out security as well. So investments in cybersecurity and just basic plant security, because we still have single points of failure, and we have to protect them. So, sir, I think I'm more optimistic than I was a year ago about this, partly because of the additional funds the supplementals provided. And I think there's always more work to do, but I believe that we are now in a good position to execute those plans several years faster. I mean, my goal is to kind of make a 15-year plan a 10-year plan or less. And we're on track to do that now, sir, with your support.
Could you touch base on the critical materials from trusted partners, that report, and how far, to the degree we can discuss
Yes,
it
sir.
here, we've gone?
Yes, sir. So I think we are working to, and actually this was really great work that was done by my predecessor. We had a good idea of what those supply chains were. So we had visibility. We weren't relying on contractors for that. We knew. We now have efforts underway to get all the countries of concern off of those charts. So that is our goal. Working with allies, we might pay a little more in some cases, but the security issue is more important in my view. And I'm willing to work with members to secure those resources. So I think as long as we have access to kind of the free world, and we have ways to get those materials from countries that we can count on.
Thank you. Just one last quick question, and this has to do with the Humvee safety upgrades. Unfortunately, we saw reports on one of the widely watched news programs of the Humvee turnovers, the deaths of those young people. For the last 2 years, we put significant money into that. The question is, what are the numbers looking like for those that have been repaired? Is it doing what we would hope it to do, which is save lives and still operate?
Yes, sir. So I think I do have some numbers. So We've so far, and first of all, the fleet we're talking about, assuming JLTV plays out, is about 55 to 57,000 Humvees that would remain in the Army over time based on current structure. We have 6,815 kits procured, 5,000 have been installed. We do, though, have a big contract award coming that will procure an additional 53,000 kits using the 22 and 23 additional funding that Congress provided. We right now have a broad installation plan. So Red River Army Depot is our #1 place that happens.
Right.
To increase the rate there, which is about 700 kits a month, we would potentially need to add another shift, but we're looking at options for potentially doing that. We also have 10 CONUS locations where we do the work kind of around the Army, so not everything has to come back. Same issue there. The long pole in the tent is actually hiring a workforce to have additional shifts to go faster. So, sir, between that upgrade program, which is now, unlike last year, funded in the budget at about $50 million a year, so we have a solid baseline, and that's out through the FIDUP. We're also, of course, still buying new Humvees. We're going to get about 700 more because of we've sent to Ukraine. That adds. And then also JLTV production, of course. Those three legs of the stool, retrofit kits, new Humvees, JLTV, are how we're trying to get at the safety issue you rightly pointed out, sir.
So I appreciate that. So the ones that have been retro, has it prevented those deaths? Has it brought it down, the bottom line?
So, sir, I was looking at the safety stats. Now, I don't believe I can, it's hard to prove a negative. You know, how an accident that's avoided, you don't learn about because it wasn't an accident. But I think we do know that that technology, which is used in the private, public sector as well, is just modern brake technology. I'm sure it has avoided accidents, no question.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, and that was a great question. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questions. And just if we couldn't piggyback and continue that, because from I happen to represent Red River Army Depot, which does a lot of this work, and from what I was told by them and the manufacturer of the kits, we're doing about 500 to 700 a month right now, but they have the capabilities of doing 1,200. And if we fully fund them, which we plan to do in this NDAA, that with the Army's cooperation, they said that we can retrofit everything within 4 years. And that's what we're really talking about. And what my colleague, Norcross, was mentioning is we want to save lives. And this is a bipartisan effort. It's not controversial, and we want to give you the money. And we just need some cooperation because, quite frankly, with all due respect, Mr. Secretary, there's been some dragging of feet within the Army. And we're trying to, and please feel free to if you differ with me, educate me on that. But that's what we've been hearing. And I just want to make sure we do everything we can to expedite.
Yes, sir. So, and I noted your exchange with the Secretary and the Chief on this, and I did some research to make sure I was ready. So I believe the big thing coming is, of course, the execution of a very large contract for the additional 53,000 kits that will get that kit production line up to even faster rate than it is now. That'll give us the kits to install. Second, when I went and talked to our folks at Red River, as I mentioned to the ranking member, one way to increase our rate is more workforce. So, sir, we are exploring that. That would be a second shift, essentially, both Red River.
They're ready to work at Red River. That's why every time I go there, they tell me we're ready.
So, and sir, of course, Red River does a lot of other great things for the Army. So it is a balance. Tank Automotive Command oversees it day to day between this workload and other workload. I can commit to you, sir, I will do a deep dive on how they're currently approaching that balance and see where there are opportunities for this workforce increase or just workload shift, perhaps taking people off things and putting them on this. And I can commit to you to come back with what I find when I go and look, sir. But I think the urgency is there, and I don't believe there's any intentional foot dragging, but I know members find this an urgent issue, so I take your concerns very seriously, sir.
No, thank you. And if we can too, shift gears a little bit to the JLTV. I think we're gonna transition fully by 2050. Is that the goal right now?
Yes, sir. I think that's the goal.
And can we just visit on the depot plans for the JLTV?
So, sir, I think since Red River is our center of excellence in depot world for doing wheeled vehicles, I think over time there will eventually need to be a depot workload there for JLTV, since it'll be our major thing in the fleet. But again, sir, I apologize. I don't have, I am reluctant to say too much, but I could come back to you with the very latest we have, working with my AMC partners in General Hamilton to get you an outlook.
No, thank you. I appreciate that. And as technology, I'm particularly interested in the development of directed energy weapons, because I think that really is the future moving forward. We never want to fight, yesterday's wars today. We want to fight tomorrow's wars tomorrow. As dramatic as it sounds, it's not a hypothetical capability anymore. It exists today, and even better if this works, there are demonstrated technologies that successfully shoot down drones and mortars and things of that nature. So my question for the witnesses, Secretary, and if the generals want to pop in, is how are we moving forward with this technology and pushing it through the Valley of Death, and can we expect these platforms to become programs of record and field the technologies?
Yes, sir. So I'll start, and then I think my colleagues could chime in on the potential advantages. There are many. So we are doing good work. So the Rapid Capabilities Technology Office has been leading us on directed energy, and that's everything from a 20 kilowatt laser on a very light vehicle to a 50 kilowatt laser on a Stryker, and you may have seen pictures of that, to a potentially as powerful as 300 kilowatt laser on a larger platform. So we're really trying to push and see on all fronts where it makes the most sense. I will say, sir, the R&D is promising. As you noted, this is now not hypothetical. You can have lasers that, and other DE, we do have other DE like high-powered microwave, that can do useful military things. I think right now, sir, our challenge is working to get the cost down on manufacturing at scale, because getting the technology to work is phase one, but everything in the Army is at large scale, and there's probably manufacturing technology work we need to do with our industry partners to get these things to where the Army can afford them in mass, because that's how we need them. But, sir, we're further along on this. I came to work on this committee in 2007. It was talked about then, but we never had anything real. This is real stuff now.
Yeah.
We just have to find a way to make it affordable and then get into production. But the potential benefits are many, and if I could have General Rainey talk about what some of those might be, if that's useful, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman, and absolutely agree that it's doable and it's essential. I mentioned earlier the challenges with contested logistics. The ability to pre-position things is a potential solution, a partial solution, but our current limitation is the ability to protect something that we put forward, within range of the Chinese. So that, coupled with the magazine depth, so even if you had a kinetic solution, it's only going to be as good as you have rounds for it. So directed energy, very effective, going to help with protection and contested logistics. The current efforts we need to continue to make progress on are mobility, being able to, if we build this as a critical part of our capability, we have to be able to maneuver with it. So directed energy, MSHORAD on Strykers, it's going to actually be mobile and can go with our forces is very high payoff in terms of potential. And then there's also a power generation, so that they currently are consuming the cost that Mr. Bush mentioned is a limitation. The other one is the large amount of power it takes to generate those, so we need to continue to make progress. But absolutely agree, it's going to be essential and not, in make-believe future, but as soon as we can deliver it.
Well, thank you, General, and thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you. The Chair now recognizes Mr. Ryan for his 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you all for being here. General Rainey, just on a brief personal note, I proudly served 3rd Brigade, 4th ID, I think just before you took command, sir, so appreciate your service then, and proud to see you with 4 stars on your shoulders now. Thank you, and thank you to all of you. Just wanted to follow up on some of the points you made, Mr. Bush, particularly appreciate and commend changing acquisition culture that increases the risk appetite given the urgency that we're facing. I think along with that is this idea of quickly recognizing when things aren't succeeding, creating mechanisms to do that in a transparent and rapid way, and then figuring out what and how to divest. So this is a broad question, but if you could each talk about, particularly given I agree, General, the importance of the Army role in Indo-PACOM. With that in mind, what divestitures would you identify as sort of priorities?
So, sir, if I could answer kind of the acquisition part of that question. I think actually the new authorities Congress gave us For example, rapid prototyping and rapid fielding. And we've done this with IVAS, actually, as an example. We got to a hard test. It did not work as well as we thought, but because of those authorities, we were able to, in a matter of months, restructure the program and head off in a new direction that will actually, we hope now, achieve what the Army was trying to do. That willingness to accept risk, and then that willingness to work with Congress, as long as we're transparent, on ability to change directions, quickly, is essential. And that, I believe, is one of the goals of that acquisition reform. And while I'm disappointed that it didn't work the first time, I think if we get it right, it'll prove a success for using that type of more flexible approach to acquisition than the old way, sir.
Appreciate that. Secondly, sort of separate question, but all related, of course. Want to dive in, you talked a bit in your remarks, but also the prepared testimony about Project Convergence. And I've heard different delineations and articulations of what this is. I've heard it discussed in relation to JADC2 and the role in that development, but then in your prepared testimony, also talked about sort of a broader articulation of what Project Convergence is, which I'm encouraged by. The question is, why is the Army not executing in 2023, given the urgency of the fight, given the importance of convergence, and just helping me to understand how you all think about that, maybe starting with you, General Rainey.
Thank you, Congressman, and thank you for that question. We absolutely are doing Project Convergence in 23, so that one report thing was not accurate. But
okay.
More importantly, Project Convergence is an Army-hosted joint persistent experimentation campaign. So it started as a one-time thing we did inside the Army, then we did with our joint partners, then we did a big, large experiment with joint partners, and we're integrating more of our coalition and allied partners. What we learned, though, is we can't wait every 12 to 18 months, the speed of war, the sense of urgency. So we've switched to a persistent experimentation where we're every single month, at least once a month, or if not more, we're looking at ongoing exercises that are already funded. I prefer to do them in theater if we can, because it's harder and the learning is richer than when we do a controlled environment. For example, Bala Katan is General Flynn's major exercise going on right now in the Philippines. We have AFC teammates integrated into that and are watching them experiment with stuff while they do that. Next month, EDGE is our single biggest Army aviation experiment we do out in Yuma, Arizona. So we'll consistently and persistently experiment, and then when the timing is right, we'll spiral up for a capstone event. The next one of those is planned for February and March of 24.
Got it.
We'll bring the joint force together. So it's persistent, consistent, spiral up as required, because you're right, we absolutely have to learn better and faster than our enemies.
Appreciate that. That helps clarify. It didn't make sense when I heard it that way. And offline, if we could follow up, or my team with your staff, sir, on just understanding what some of those focus areas are to the degree in whatever setting we can, that'd be greatly appreciated.
Absolutely, Congressman. In fact, General McKean, my deputy, is briefing PSMs this Friday, and I'd personally love the opportunity to follow up with you.
Great. Well, thank you all, and I'll stay on time and yield back.
Thank you, and we're going to stay on your side of the aisle and have Chair recognizes Mr. Jackson from North Carolina.
Secretary Bush, just a quick question about the next generation squad weapon. I think our soldiers have been told for a really long time, I've been in for 20 years, for as long as I've been in, that there's a new rifle coming just around the corner. And every once in a while, the Army Times will do an article about, hey, look at this new rifle, and then we think this is what it's going to look like. 20 years of this. Now, what I gather from you is this time's for real, but if you could just tell me so that I can relay back to a lot of these folks, a lot of these 11 Bravos, what is your level of confidence that a new rifle will actually be fielded within whatever time frame?
Yes, sir. So I think I take your point. I was here working for Congress for many of those years and saw the same several attempts. I think I wouldn't say cautiously optimistic. I'm optimistic that we got it this time, sir. So I think we found a way to do it much faster. We didn't ask for too much. I think we ended up with a design that will provide with the right balance. It's difficult designing a new weapon with a new caliber. It's a trade-off between, in this case, weight. It's a heavier round. It's a 6.8 millimeter. But we want capability that the general could get into that we can't get with 5.56 right now. So I think, sir, I think we are absolutely on track, and I think the budget numbers reflect just how many we're going to start buying and then delivering. I would point out we are going through production qualification tests. So this is production weapons coming from SIG that we are going to test to make sure they've addressed a few issues that we found in earlier testing. And so those decision points will lead us to then hitting our foot on the floor on actually going to full rate production.
Congressman, if I may add, for our 24 budget request, we have requested over $500 million for this specific program that includes the RDT&E to continue the developments Mr. Bush spoke about, procurement, and the ammunition to yield resources to provide us with nearly 20,000 of those weapons, and that's a mix of the rifle and the automatic rifle. So we are moving out on this pending that production qualification.
Now, with respect to the number that you just gave me, General, you said 500. In this form, it's 322. Does this not include some of the things you just mentioned?
It may not include the ammunition required for it.
I'm for providing ammunition
Yes,
as well. I just
yes.
want to go on record.
Yes, it's the total package, a complete capability in the hands of our soldiers. The RDT&E to continue to advance, the rifles themselves, and the ammunition to match that, and that's the $522 million investment.
Okay, so then Secretary Bush, what I hear you saying and making the optimistic case is where we're at right now is in final stages of design, that you have seen lots of green lights with respect to design, no red flags yet, a couple of tweaks yet to be made. Upon those tweaks being made and finalization of the design process, General, you're telling me that funding appears to be there to enter production.
Yes, sir. So I think we're further along than design. I mean, so one reason this program I am optimistic about is the extensive prototyping and testing with soldiers we did before we picked one. So there were 3 vendors. We did a lot of testing, more than we would normally do at that point with soldiers to make sure, the weapon can work, but if soldiers, it doesn't work for them doing that mission, it's not worth getting. We did a lot of homework up front on this to try to get at that. So on both fronts, sir, military utility and appropriateness and technology risk, I believe we are in a good situation.
All right, now here's my follow-up question. Let's say new rifle comes out, it's great, infantry loves it, everyone else is going to want it. Everyone else is going to want it. Are you prepared to say no to every other soldier who's going to want this? Or are you going to be back here the next year saying, as it turns out, we need an extra $3 billion because everybody wants this?
Thank you, Congressman. I don't know that I'm the person to say how many we'd buy, but I've seen this weapon. I've fired it. It is a dramatic improvement. We need to start fielding it to the part of our force that is most likely to make contact with the enemy and move as rapidly as we receive funding to do.
Yes, sir, I would say that going beyond our current procurement plans for the infantry force is a pending decision. It's certainly possible, but we haven't made, the Army is not, and it wouldn't be an acquisition decision, it's really a requirements decision and resourcing, sir. We haven't made that decision yet.
With my last 10 seconds, was this primarily, the restriction to infantry, was this primarily a fiscal decision? Is that the primary motivation for the restriction?
Yeah, as far as the requirement for the part of the Army we refer to as the close combat force, this is a little more complicated weapon. The training is worth it, but it takes more training. It's heavier, so it's not necessarily the weapon for the entire total Army, 1.2 million people. As I mentioned earlier, we believe the M4 is an enduring weapon system. So I don't believe this is a weapon for every single person in the Army. So I think the acquisition objective was calibrated based on the close combat force.
Very good. Thanks so much. When I go to Mr. Horsford.
Thank you, Chairman Whitman, and to Ranking Member Norcross. As we've heard in this committee during the last couple of months, success in an Indo-Pacific theater will require our soldiers to maneuver semi-autonomously on a fluid, complex battlefield. And I was glad to see the Army shift towards network modernization to allow our soldiers to communicate more easily, ward off jamming, and converging disparate networks. My question is, can you please describe how the Army is adopting hardware and software that streamlines network initialization and management while also increasing capabilities, please?
Sir, so I can talk about high level what we're trying to do, and you've kind of described it in your question. Is first of all, our network plan, when you go above kind of the tactical radio, is highly dependent on commercial technology, which I think is good, because that is where there is so much innovation in that network space, using just commercial R&D and taking advantage of it, including in network management, sir. I think I'd point out two aspects of that. First of all is seeing the network. So there are investments underway to make sure we actually just understand our own network and also see the electronic warfare environment it's living in. But then also network management tools. A lot of this is software, just so we can give our great signal officers and enlisted people an ability to manage the network. I would add that the Army always wants more bandwidth, and we always find a way to rapidly fill it and kind of jam ourselves. So I think prioritizing how we're using the network is just as important as building the machine, sir.
Thank you. As a result of Ukraine security assistance, Army has placed $1.49 billion in 155 millimeter artillery munition contracts to backfill these munitions. At the same time, we are hearing the continuing issues with the industrial base not being able to meet our needs from munitions to tanks. How is the Army assuring that we are meeting our 155 millimeter artillery munitions requirements, and how can Congress assist in those efforts? And Secretary Bush, how would you describe the fragility of the tank industrial base today and the importance of funding a brigade of tanks each year?
So, sir, on the first one, I think, thanks to Congress and the supplemental funding received last year, we are now in the midst of rapidly executing our plan to, at a minimum, increase by fivefold the number of shells per month we are able to produce. And it's not just the shells, it's the charges that go with it, it's the fuse, it's the primer, it's the full package of what we provide. We are already up from originally 14,000 a month to 24,000 a month now, and we have a steady path to get there next year to even much higher levels. So I think that is underway, sir. I think, and I think what we found as we've done that is it hasn't been fragility per se, but simply capacity. So the long pole in the tent of that effort is the machine tools, the actual just factory machine tools necessary to shape steel and fill it safely with explosives. Those machines take a long time to make. They are not readily available. You have to order them. It takes about a year, and then you have to get them into production. Lessons from that could be for the future. How much of that machinery do we want to buy in advance? How much do we retain in perhaps a cold, warm state versus a full running? Because, sir, if we have to do this again in the future, we need to use this opportunity to identify what the hard points are and position ourselves better for the next time around.
Thank you. And in my final comments, in your opening statement, you noted that what we are seeing in Ukraine validates your 6 modernization initiatives, notably the long-range precision fires, air and missile defense, next-generation combat vehicle, and the network. Can you expand on how the lessons learned from this conflict regarding survivability of some of these platforms are being considered when making decisions regarding investing and modernizing?
So, sir, if I could briefly start and answer your previous question, I apologize for failing to answer. On the tank production side, I think right now we have a very healthy production activity in the Army for tanks. That is not just U.S. Army orders, that is also because of foreign military sales that have been quite robust, and we now have large orders from Poland coming in, plus Romania, and we hope more. So, sir, I think the issue with tank production is how do we, what are the challenges to sustaining that over time and making sure that if we make if we have to go down, we don't go down too far to where we are hurting the industrial base. I'm happy to work with you and others on the committee, sir, on the details of that. If I could turn to General Rainey on Ukraine lessons learned, if that's okay, sir.
Thank you, Congressman, for that. So heavy forces, tanks, Bradleys, Paladins are absolutely essential, and I feel strongly will remain relevant going forward. They're part of our enduring capabilities, and we need to continue to iterate to improve them. Ukraine is demonstrating a challenge with small UAS, vehicle protective system. We have requirements for those, both to upgrade our current vehicles and are designing those into the requirements for new vehicles like OMFE and our RCVs, for example. But so if you're going to fight someone who has tanks, and there are a lot of our enemies in the world have a lot of tanks, you have to have armored forces. The lethality of the modern battlefield is going up exponentially. The violence, the killing. And if you're fighting an enemy, especially somebody who relies heavily on fires, like both of our primary threats do, you have to have protection to be able to keep your soldiers alive as they maneuver. And the last thing from Ukraine, you'll notice there is a dramatic increase in reliance on urban warfare. And for the Army to enter into an urban area, there's an absolute essential requirement to have heavy formations to do that.
Thank you for the courtesy of the additional time for the response, and appreciate your service.
Thank you, Mr. Horsford. And we'll now go to Mr. Norcross.
Thank you, Chairman. General Rainey, Army Futures Command, recently decided to establish a cross-functional team for congested logistics. I'm all in. It also reminds me of when we brought this up when Futures Command was stood up. So what has changed since the creation of Futures Command and the creation of the original cross-functional teams and where we are now? What made us recognize at this point that logistics should now enter into this, the congested?
Thank you, Ranking Member. It is not that we just all of a sudden realized that is important. Going all the way back 5 years ago to the large-scale combat operations study and gaps that we identified contested logistics as one of those. One of the unqualified successes of AFC, my predecessors, is the idea of these cross-functional teams to stand up a group, clearly identify a problem statement, pick 3 to 5 things, clearly define the portfolio, and then mass talent, pile talented humans from the different relevant organizations on it. So the contested logistics CFT was an opportunity to capitalize on a good practice on something that we realized was a critical requirement, and candidly, we need to be going faster and better. And I could talk about the kind of things we think that new CFT is going to do, if that's interesting to you, sir.
So I didn't mean to suggest you didn't realize it, but trying for 5 years, when was that decision made that we have to step this up to actually do it? Or is it a process of time?
I don't know. Prior to my taking command, the secretary asked me when I took command of AFC to do a review of the CFTs and make recommendations, working closely with General Daly, the prior AMC commander, now General Hamilton, the commander. This was the number one thing I thought was an opportunity to go faster. Right. by manning a CFT for it, putting it at Huntsville, co-located with the great AMC enterprise. And I have high expectations about the speed with which we can pursue some of the gaps that we're going after.
So that leads me to the next question. What is on the horizon? What's a likely candidate?
For that CFT, sir, or for others?
Future others.
I don't want to get ahead, but I could think of things like deep sensing, for example. We have a task force that is working diligently on that, would be one. I think there's opportunities as the merger of offensive and defensive fires is becoming pretty clear. As I said earlier, we're not going to be able to have radars and shooters for defense and radars and shooters for offense, and I think there'll be an opportunity there. Another one that I believe is a clear opportunity for us to go faster would be human-machine integration. How we not replace humans with robots, but how do we offload risk from our men and women onto machines, right? Not trade blood for first contact, optimize machines to do that, but more importantly, optimize our humans for the things that they're uniquely qualified. So those are some things I would like to go faster, but it would be premature to talk about potential CFTs. But I'd be glad to follow up with you, sir.
Now, of course, the Futures Command, this is exactly some of the areas that we were hoping for. So with that,
Sure.
Chairman, I'll yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Norcross. General Rainey, I do want to ask you and Secretary Bush where we are today with the fragility of our industrial base as it relates to munitions, the significant demand that we see from Ukraine, the assistance that we're getting from our friends and allies, and how do we address the issues going forward with challenges now with shortage of training rounds for 155, artillery batteries for Gimlers, making sure that we have not only that in the short term, but making sure we don't get back on the roller coaster ride again, making sure that we don't look at it and go, gosh, we have to massively increase production, and we now produce all these munitions, and then all of a sudden go, oh, that's all we need, and then you ask the industrial base to just disappear. So we end on this roller coaster ride. Instead of saying, listen, how do we ramp up and how do we maintain this level of production to where we don't find ourselves in these situations where we have magazine depth that's precipitously low, and then we're looking around the world for munitions. And then two, we are looking at ways to make sure we modernize. That's another way to address production elements. We have Stingers, which in the day, incredibly effective even today. But we see there are a lot of other platforms out there that have greater range and greater lethality. And, we need to restock the current weapons magazines. But the question is, how do we go forward in modernizing that and not having to reinvent the wheel, not go through the years and years it takes to write new requirements and go through programs of record, and then 6 or 7 years down the road go, oh, miraculously, now we have a new, surface-to-air, shoulder-fired anti-aircraft missile. So how do we address that from getting back into where we've been before, and that is this fits and starts with the industrial base, and how do we use this opportunity to use what we've learned in the past to get on a very steady track in building weapons magazine depth and modernizing platforms that now seems like to me a great opportunity to do that.
Sir, I can start. So I think we are learning lessons from this that I'd certainly be happy to share some of the emerging ones. First of all, there are tools we have that we are applying. So for example, multi-year contracts, they stabilize funding in the budget, meaning at least in the Pentagon, members could change it, but in the Pentagon, it holds that funding in place, which is a crucial issue. Because industry can see that, they can make investments against it, they have a guaranteed revenue stream essentially, and they can do good things in private capital markets to make their businesses better. So that's number one, sir, and we are going to execute 2 in 23 using the authority provided by this committee for artillery shells and charges, and then we have the 2 more coming if we get approach language for PAC-3 and Gimlers, and we are already looking at opportunities in FY25. That's number one, sir. The second one is as we modernize, as we do this production ramp up, we are also modernizing. So one of our lessons learned is that we need better, more modern manufacturing technology because the newer tech is more flexible, it scales better, it's safer, it has less people. So it's just all those things that make it capable of, for example, if I wouldn't say a trough, but production will probably someday, wars end, go down some. Hopefully the new, better manufacturing tech allows us to affordably retain capacity so that it's there when we need to ramp it up. So a third thing is better coordination with allies. So we have learned who's got what from this drill, not just stockpiles, but also manufacturing capability. There is clearly renewed interest in Europe in particular and finally in investing in this. because while we are the arsenal of democracy, those countries want their own sovereign capability, and I think that's great, but it has to be coordinated. So we aren't stepping on each other, taking from each other's sources, or making different things that aren't compatible. And doctoral plant, I think, the Undersecretary for Acquisition he's in Europe actually this week and doing that kind of thing. That needs to continue. A final thought, sir, is we expend a lot of effort in the Department of Defense doing, war plans for how would we fight a conflict. I believe an equal amount of effort is necessary, and this will be a department-wide effort, not just the Army, to do that kind of planning for mobilization. So to borrow a term from a friend I heard him use was a mobilization O plan, to use the department's slang, because I think planning in advance for what a 2 or 3 year conflict might look like with a advanced foreign, advanced enemy is something that we need to do. We can't wish the problem away. So that's a few thoughts, sir.
Great. General Rainey, any additional thoughts?
Thank you, Chairman. So big picture, major operational lesson learned for me from watching what's happening in Ukraine is when we in the Army pursue capability, adding capabilities, we need to pay more attention and factor heavily in capacity as a problem. So something might be the best capability, but if you don't factor in your ability to sustain that, you're going to miss. I'm not saying we weren't doing that, but going forward, the capability and capacity, and even if you have both of those, you still have to get it into the right position. The things we were able to do for the Ukrainians because of 7th ATC and the APS and the different things that we had in Europe, the relationships, we need to get after getting that same capability established in Indo-PACOM. More specifically, and it may be worth a follow-up, is the total Army munition requirement is a very elaborate, detailed process. The Army just completed, hasn't gone up outside the Army yet, but the Army just went through that at the Chief and Secretary's direction to account for the new national defense strategy and what we're learning in Ukraine, because ultimately you're never going to have enough ammo. You're not going to have all you want, but you got to manage risk, and you can't manage risk unless you clearly understand what a clear-eyed requirement is. And I think that that's a really quality piece of work that would be glad to follow up with you.
Listen, I think that's incredibly important. Secretary Bush, I appreciate your perspective, too, on the mobilization aspects of where we go with a strategy that leads back to making sure, too, that magazine depth, modernization, and weapon systems are all part of that. Just as Ms. Sherrill said and Ranking Member Norcross said, there are two elements that are integrated as part of that. Modernization of energetics. As we have emphasized through the years, precision, which is exactly what we should be doing. At the same time, our adversaries were also emphasizing range and lethality. And with modern energetics, we can get back into the business of precision and range and lethality. And I think that needs to be an important part of the entire planning process as we modernize existing weapons platforms. We don't have to build something new, but if you can take modernized energetics and do that, just as Ranking Member Norcross said too, the efforts of manufacturing these energetics is a dangerous process. When I was a student at Virginia Tech, I remember vividly a couple times a year, Radford Arsenal would go boom. And unfortunately, some people didn't go home for dinner that night because of that. And that was one of those places where you just said, hey, that's an inherent risk. It shouldn't be. There are modernized processes today and where you no longer batch mix the chemicals to make energetics, propellants, or explosives. And they use it in the pharmaceutical industry. It's called continuous flow, where you take the chemicals and you can very much control them at smaller volumes. So as you combine them and heat them and cool them, smaller volumes reduce the risk. That technology is directly applicable to what should be happening in energetics production. And if we had the proper sort of research in that realm, I think we could do that and do that safely, making sure we can do it at a volume. Because remember, you can do that 24 hours a day. Continuous flow, take those chemicals, feed them in there, combine them, heat them, and cool them. So we ought to be doing research there. Our adversaries are. Russia, at the height of conflict with Ukraine, is publishing papers on modernized energetics. If they're doing that in the face of this conflict, we can certainly do that. So I think this all has to be part of a comprehensive effort on building magazine depth, modernizing weapons, looking at existing platforms. It may be we don't have to reinvent the wheel, we just have to modernize the propellants and the explosives in those platforms. I think that's a great opportunity for us, and we can do that at the speed of relevance. So I would encourage the Army to look at that, but it also needs to be a DoD-wide enterprise. I think there needs to be a single place where we say, what are we going to do with energetics, and how do we put some money into advanced manufacturing? We talk about advanced manufacturing for semiconductors and other things. You know, we can do the same for energetics. So with that, Mr. Norcross, any additional questions? Okay, very good. I have railed enough. So, so anyway, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks so much for your leadership. We look forward to continuing to work with you as we face the challenges ahead. I feel very confident that the Army is up for the challenge. We need to be a partner with you to make sure that you have what's necessary. You know, we as much as we want to, we'll do our best to leap the building in a single bound, but, you know, if we'll get most of the way to the top, and whatever we don't get to, we will make sure we continue on that path. So thank you all again. And with that, our subcommittee is adjourned.